The NBA trade deadline has passed, and we break it down next on Beyond the Locker Room. The NBA trade deadline came and went on Thursday at 3 p.m. It was a pretty volatile, pretty energetic trade deadline compared to some other trade deadlines. I think just off the top, I think what you saw was a lot of people moving contracts, moving money, draft compensation to some extent to try and avoid the luxury tax. So this is really the first since the CBA's been employed, this might be the first deadline after it, but you definitely see a lot of moves being made from a financial standpoint to make sure that you're not paying the second apron for some teams, or even the first apron for other teams, including the team in this city. We'll see. We'll go through the Raptors in a second, but I'm going to break down some other trades that happen around the league. So let's get into the first one that piqued my interest. Was the Detroit Pistons. Of course, big Pistons fan. Pistons in a 3-team deal with the Bulls and the Timberwolves. So Ivey was dealt to the Bulls. The Bulls also added veteran Mike Conley Jr. And then afterwards, the Pistons pretty much got Saric and, who else we ended up getting on this one? And, Kevin Huerter. So this deal, and also too, just to make sure, Chicago landed Ivey, Conley Jr., and a 2026 first-round pick protected swap with Detroit. So that's a very important point. Now, Detroit, based on what their record is, that pick won't be great if they were looking to swap it. But it's something to note, because there wasn't a lot of action happening around the 2026 picks, which was an interesting trend that happened a lot when draft compensation was involved. It just gave you a signal that 2026 is such a big draft for people that no one was willing to move off of 2026. So that was an interesting, interesting point, or interesting thing to notice, how teams were making sure they'll give away any draft picks, but not trying to touch the 2026 if possible. So that was an interesting observation. Now, my thoughts on it coming from a Pistons perspective. Fair enough. Ivey, I thought they could give it the Ivey-Cunningham tandem a little more time. It's something that was always on and off due to both of them being injured at different times. They never seemed to be getting on the same page. And Detroit probably said, okay, we're going to cut the ribbon right now and move on, especially from the Ivey perspective when it came to his health. It was frustrating. It was a little surprising that when he came back, he didn't get a starting position, so that was probably the tell that they were looking to move on from him. I do have my concerns from a standpoint for Detroit's roster, I mentioned this when we did the Detroit breakdown earlier on the pod earlier this season, and my concern is with when they get in the playoffs, is do they have someone that can take the offensive burden off of Cade when the time comes and when teams start to blitz Cade, which will likely happen in second halves of big games in the playoffs. And I am concerned that when that does happen, do they have another guy that can make a play that could take the offensive load? Or even when Cade sits on the bench, be it just his normal bench minutes or if he's in foul trouble, what do they do then? I love the development Duran. I think he could take some of that burden from an offensive standpoint, take that load onto his shoulders. But I think from a perimeter standpoint, they're going to have to hope for someone to kind of make a jump. I don't expect it to be Thompson. I think you're looking at Holland. He might be the guy that can kind of maybe hopefully make a jump with now the removal of Ivey. So I think that's interesting. But what I do like from the deal is something I mentioned then, and I mentioned now in the earlier podcast with Detroit. They needed another big. Getting Saric, I think, was a nice pickup. You're just asking for him to supplement, B. Stu and Duran. Hopefully, he could give you maybe 10 minutes, and that might be all you need in a playoff series. He spaced the floor, which is good too. So I think from that point, it was a very useful pickup. I never believed in the Anthony Davis moves with Detroit, because Detroit doesn't necessarily need an Anthony Davis. They needed some tweaks at the margins, and I think from that perspective, that's a good setup. Huerter offers some more shooting, which doesn't hurt. And he's a little more than just a shooter. I think he's more of a scorer in my mind. So he is a little more dynamic than that, and he can kind of supplement some of the Ivy dynamism that's gone from that standpoint. So that is why. So overall, I like the deal for Detroit's perspective. From the Chicago side of things, I'm not really sure what the Shy is up to. I mean, my whole thing with Reinsdorf and those guys, they never want tank. So I think they're just looking at, okay, we pulled the plug on the Kobe White experiment. He got dealt. What we're gonna do. We'll get into small things about Vooch. He's moved on. We're kind of starting with Giddey and this bunch here with Buzelis and these guys. So I think that's what they're looking at, and they think they could do it in midstream. I think getting Ivy, a young player, to build as part of that core, I think it's a good move from that standpoint. I think they got one too many guards though, but we'll see if that's something they look to move in the offseason, where they kind of put a couple of them together for something bigger. They move up in the draft perhaps, but that is an interesting part from the roster standpoint, where they got a lot of guards now. Even though they moved off of Io, but they still got a lot of guards. So that's my Chicago part of it. Minnesota, part of it was moving some money and getting it out the door from that perspective. Getting Mike Conley Jr. to move on from there. I think they were kind of looking to see if they could. I think Minnesota was looking to see if they clear out space in case for a Giannis deal as well too. That did not come to fruition. But overall, interesting deal, especially for two rivals like Detroit and Chicago. Let's get into the big boys here. Okay, James Harden moves to Cleveland. Harden was traded from the Clippers to Cleveland. The way that came about, check some of the oral history on that one, man. How Harden in 48 hours said, yeah, I'm out. You ain't gonna give me a contract, I'm gone. Gotta love that with James, boy. He ain't waffling like Giannis or any some other stars. He's like, when he ain't getting his money, he's out the door. Anyways, they move him on to Cleveland, pretty much straight up old-fashioned deal with Darius Garland being the central figure from Cleveland's side. So in return, the Clippers received Garland a 2026 second-round pick. So it's not too shabby. This deal, I mean, Harden, one thing Harden can do is flat out score. So from that perspective, I think he's a great pickup for them to move up in the standings in the East. As always, when it comes to Harden, when it gets to postseason time and the birds start chirping and the flowers start to bloom, Harden decides to go into hibernation. And I think that's going to still be a problem. I think the second part with Harden is he's just one more guy that if you're Donovan Mitchell, you're looking back over your shoulder like this, where you're looking to see if you can have some dogs out here. And that's not the case, which now leads me to think okay, if they're going to re-sign Harden, which I'm not sure at this time if they have done so, even if they don't, at some point, the question has to be about Mobley. And at some point, when is Mobley going to make another jump? Because I'm not sure if there's any more jumps left in him. 5 years in, and he's a pretty much 18-point per game scorer. He's fantastic defensively, but as I said before, I said to the guys on Basketball Rewind, he's a guy that honestly I could watch a Cavaliers game and not hear his name called for almost an entire quarter. And if you're a man's getting paid that much and you're the number 3 overall pick, some expectations, you gotta be a dude. And it can't be just a dude in this case here that's a great hustle guy and block shots and stuff like that. I get DPOY, I get all that. When we talk dudes get buckets and get big time buckets. They break runs. That's what I'm talking about, a dude. And he can't just be a guy just sitting out there just kind of just, being a passenger, just kind of just watching what's going on. So I find it fascinating what Cleveland's going to look like in the playoffs with this bunch. But we'll see. It's a risk, but I think overall it's a risk to move them up in the standings, but I'm not sure if it's going to help them in the playoffs. Harden has been notorious. I saw a stat the other day on First Things First, which is incredible. They had posted kind of all his contemporaries, right? From, I guess you want to say, his era. LeBron, Steph, Kevin Durant. And Durant was I think one time had a single-digit field goal attempt game. LeBron was twice. Steph might have been once or twice. They went to Harden's number. Harden, for field goal attempts, guys, single digits, 22 times it had happened in the postseason. I wish you luck, Cleveland. I wish you luck. Next trade. Triple J, Jaren Jackson Jr. I mentioned on Basketball Rewind about a week prior to the trade deadline that he's a guy that I think there might be more to it. I think I might mention a couple episodes ago that he's a guy that everyone's talking about everyone's talking about Ja Morant's like, you might want to be putting out some feelers on Triple J. And, Danny Ainge came a knocking, and Memphis said, we are willing to open the door. And so be it. It happened, man. I think this is the first big trade that really shook things up to me when I saw that, because I couldn't believe it. I gotta give Danny Ainge credit, man. I mean, as I said before, he'll trade his mama for a good deal if he get the right deal. But Danny Ainge came out of this deal without giving up Ace Bailey, Keontae George, even Sensabaugh, or the 2026 draft pick. Impressive. Very impressive. So for that to happen, I'm shocked, from a Utah standpoint, they get a guy that can block shots, kind of hold down that defensive unit, which is something they've struggled with, obviously. Yeah, and even Martin's still staying on the team, by the way, which made sense. Memphis wants to cut salary, so Martin was never going to be on the menu. But, when you look at it, from Utah's standpoint, he's 19-6, rebounding a little troublesome, but Utah's got enough guys around there, enough size to help with the rebounding. 1.5 blocks, that's the big part. So, for a team that has a lot of speed and athleticism, he could turn things around with his blocking capability. It really is, I think, overall, a real steal for Utah, honestly. I am shocked about that on their end. Memphis, obviously, on their side, they didn't have to worry about it to pay him any more money. So they on their side, they're fine at that point. So I think from a Utah standpoint, I think this is a really good move. I think it sets them up for the future really nicely. The Grizzlies, the Grizzlies sent him plus Conchar, so they get him and Vince Williams Jr., nice little player too. Landale, so they get some more size in this case here too, for the Jazz in exchange for rookie guard, Clayton Jr., Kyle Anderson, who gets traded in every deal at some point. Taylor Hendricks is probably the marquee person, and Niang, and 3 first round selections moving forward, which I believe is 27, 29, and 31. So 27 is a pretty weak draft, what we understand. 29, 31, we'll see. But Hendricks to me and those draft picks are kind of the signature pieces of what Memphis wanted out of it. So I think it's good to see what Hendricks could do when he gets more minutes. Now I'm excited to see what that looks like. So we'll see. Memphis moves on. Utah kind of starts to get serious about building around their now new core of Triple J, Ace Bailey, Keontae George. I think marketing will be moved probably in the offseason. Anthony Davis to Washington. Well, Washington's high enough to lose it. I think it started with the Trae Young deal, and now the pair of Trae Young with Anthony Davis, which is obviously Trae Young is a fantastic pick and roll player, and now to have him paired up with a guy, obviously could go for the lob, could pick and pop, could do anything when it comes to pick and roll with Anthony Davis. It makes sense. Obviously, AD is a big time defensive player, always around for DPOI. So I think that's a really good move. And then you pair him with Sarr. So now you have him and Sarr. The shot blocking is going to be hard to get easy buckets in there with those two, assuming Anthony Davis actually plays anytime soon. At this moment, as expected, Anthony Davis will not be playing the rest of the season in Washington. So therefore, they can build up and get another good draft pick. So Washington also received Hardy, a good player. I always like Hardy, as a Mavs fan, always like Hardy. So D'Angelo Russell, which always for the money made sense to some extent, and Dante Exum as part of the package. So they clear out space there from that perspective. Chris Middleton goes back the other way, and Branham goes the other way, plus multiple draft picks, which is a key point, multiple draft picks. So keep that in mind as well too. So Dallas builds back up their draft stock. They already have their 2026 pick, which should be a pretty decent pick. The pair with the man, the myth, the legend. I salute you, sir. Salute the flag. My man. And then to think people actually thought he might be a role player. Oh my gosh. I heard some folks, Raptor fans, I will not name whom. You guys can probably figure out who it is, on these spaces, on these X streets, talking about, oh, why would we want to get him? He just might be a role player. I'm coming to tell folks in this case, right now, you heard it here first on Beyond the Locker Room. Cooper Flagg, by the end of the season, will be considered to be a top 20 player. And if not, it will happen shortly in year 2. Trust me when I say so. All right, let's move on. The last notable, I think now, some other notable moves. I just want to kind of give my quick thoughts on these ones. Trae Young, as I mentioned, going to the Wizards previously, that was a good move. I thought they pretty much got him for almost nothing. Zubac is a really nice move from the Pacers. Pacers are going to be scary next year. Okay, you put him with Halliburton and Siakam. I mean, and Nembhard. Throwing, that's gonna be a nice team next year. And also too, the Clippers once again, they're building back up the future. They get Mathurin. I can't remember who else they got in this. They got Mathurin, Isaiah Jackson, and who else did they get on that one? Just to double check here on that one. Let's see, who else did they get? Let's see here. Just double check. Yeah, here we go. So, acquiring 2 unprotected first round picks, young scorer Zubac is a win. He's young, but he ain't that young. I don't know, young. For limited draft control, even so LA stays competitive in the short term with the deal. Zubac fixes real problems, according here to this article. But rim protection, rebounding, and physicality, but also shrinks the floor next to Siakam. That's okay. Siakam's used to being in a phone booth playing in Toronto. That's nothing for him. If anything, yeah, this would consider to be luxury from that standpoint for Siakam. It raises the floor for Indiana. 2 first-round picks for a solid center makes sense only if you're sure Halliburton comes back at full strength, which I think they will. So I think this is a good move for both teams. I like this move overall for both. Some people might say it's, Zubac is a bit overpaid as a center. I think right now he's more than decent. I know right now if you're in Toronto, you would love to have him, wherever that contract would be at the moment. So I like it for both teams. Kobe Brown also goes back to Indiana as well too. Just to clarify what the Clippers got. Isaiah Jackson I mentioned before. Mathurin. Let me talk about Mathurin for a second. So this is one of these things that's interesting. And you see this here with the Mathurin deal. Kobe White getting moved. Others, young players, kind of in their rookie deal. And this is why I say all the time the Raptors. The Raptors have an inability to actually make assessments quickly that end up costing them one way or the other. And Indiana said, you know what? We're going to have a draft pick that's going to be damn good in the top 5 or 6. I think right now they're in the 3 spot maybe. And it's like, why are we wasting time with Mathurin at this point when we might end up getting a player that's going to end up being better than Mathurin when he comes out in the draft? And that's essentially what they said. So why pay Mathurin instead of money? I like Mathurin. Don't get me wrong. I love to see him in a Raptors uniform, But the issue is that you're looking at where Mathurin's going to fit in your team, the timeline, and the money. And you're thinking to yourself, the development of Mathurin, is he going to get any better than what he is now? Marginally, but he can flat out score. There's no 2 ways about it. He still has a lot of brain farts when it comes to defense and some judgment on shot selection. No 2 ways about it. But if you're looking at, okay, we're going to have a top pick that's going to need the playing time. No need to go and pay a man this amount of money when we're going to have this big-time top 5 pick, probably, that's going to be considered to be a franchise player that's going to play with Halliburton for the next 10 years. Even when Siakam's long gone or if Siakam's actually moved into a more tertiary role or a role player later in his career, maybe in year 4 or so, or year 5, possibly. But how Siakam's game's aging, I'm not sure that would be the case. I think Siakam's one of those guys that might be able to score 20 or 22 points in his sleep. So even then, you still have a young guy that's coming up, maybe he ends up being the 3rd option and moves towards the 2nd option. And then, as time goes on, as good as he gets, the pecking order will move around. Halliburton right now is considered to be a 2nd option. I think in theory, Halliburton probably should be a 3rd option and play kind of like that Magic Johnson role where he's a 3rd option, but he can give you 30 any night if you need it. But let him do what he does best, which is facilitating and pushing the pace. And let Siakam and this new draft pick, who I suspect will be a big focal point of the offense very shortly for the Pacers. So that's how I see it for Indiana. I really like the deal for both teams. Another good move here, Boston, man. I tell you, Brad Stevens is the man, man. You can say whatever you want, man. He picked up Vucevic, so he got more depth at center. More problems in this case for the Raptors. Just saying, teams got bigger. Washington got bigger. Boston got bigger. In theory, Detroit got bigger. You notice a trend, guys? Come on now. Come on, Raptor fans. See, open your eyes. But anyways, they like the idea for Boston. They moved off of Simons. Simons in Chicago. So be it. I know I said before, tons of guards out in Chicago. I guess they'll see which one is going to be a bit of a Hunger Games situation and figure out which one survives for the offseason. One other deal to make note of, Porzingis going to the Warriors. I'll just say this. He fits with the pick and pop stuff, doesn't provide as much defensively, but he's a solid upgrade for what they already had. And we'll get into the Raptors in a moment when it comes to front court stuff from the Warriors. But I'm not sure how this works out considering how big and how monstrous the front lines are in the West. If this helps them, help, they're gonna have to try to outscore teams. I don't think this is gonna be good enough when it's all said and done. Raps. Let's get into a quick thing. Not much to say because as I suspected. All these folks say, oh, Bobby's going to do this and Bobby's going to do that. Man, Bobby ain't doing squat. Okay, Raptors, here's what they did. Traded Ochai Agbaji to the Brooklyn Nets. So they move Agbaji a 3-team deal involving the Clippers. Raptors received Chris Paul's contract and cash considerations. I will say this. I won't even get into Brooklyn stuff. What else got moved? Who cares, really? As far as this goes, this was the move off the money. Chris Paul will never play a game in Toronto. This is all about the money. The only thing I would say is this move could have been made a month ago, 8 weeks ago, off season. This type of move could have been made. And props to Kenyon, hopeful. Basketball Rewind, he had suggested this deal from last year, or at least early this year. So he was all over it. And hey, man, kudos to him. Check out Basketball Rewind, folks. That's why you got to check it out weekly. You gotta, check it out all the time, man. You get a lot of good tidbits and a lot of good quality information like that. He was all over that, saw that as the possible deal. And then the other move they made late Wednesday night, I guess, early Wednesday morning or Thursday morning. Trace Jackson Davis acquired from the Warriors. So they add some size. He's 6'9", not a great finisher. I think I saw that, the Warriors pick. By the way, the Warriors get a 2026 second-round pick from the Raptors. You got to give up something, so be it. Hoping it might be another draft class, but gotta love the Raps, man. So they add some size and front court depth. We'll see what he does. He should get some minutes. And, I hope that means that at least he gets minutes and moves CMB off from playing center. Because I don't know where Raptor fans and Raptors brass and Raptors media have gotten this idea that CMB should be a center. He is not. He's been getting nicked up all season. I think one of the reasons why is that he's playing out of position. He's 6'6", 6'7", guys. Like give it a rest. So, at least this guy's 6'9". The first year, his rookie year, Jackson Davis was had a pretty nice year. I think in the playoffs he had some nice moments. I'm not sure where it went wrong with him and the Warriors. I think the finishing, the athleticism is not great. He's okay, but I don't know, man. We'll see how much time he gets because, man, Darko, man, he don't waste much time with these bigs. He might get a day or two, maybe a week for a cup of coffee, and he might be eating pine after that. So we'll see. But as I expected, the Raptors were going to make nothing meaningful for the Raptors. All I can say is they avoid the luxury tax, which is really, I think, all this is about. We all know this is about because now you had these horrible deals that he made earlier with Quickly and Pirtle, and now he had to find a way to get out of the luxury tax, or all hell was going to break loose in the C-suite. Didn't land Sabonis, which is interesting. So, the word was that they wanted, I guess, more draft compensation. The Raptors were willing to give it. I understand that. I'm not neither here nor there with it. I'll get into it more probably when we get into on Basketball Rewind. But yeah, I think it's fine. No harm done. Let's put it that way. So it's a very exciting, very interesting deadline. I think my overall take is that the East got bigger, as I mentioned before, and contenders made some serious moves that if you're a Raptors fan, you should be concerned about. Boston got better. In theory, Detroit got better. Cleveland, arguably, you could say, got better. And so you gotta ask yourself, okay, we're going to a playoff series. If you're fortunate enough to get in the playoffs, which isn't a guarantee still, folks. Check the standings. You know, Chicago in theory might have got better, and they're one of the teams behind Toronto. So keep that in mind too. Yeah, I don't know. I just think right now you're looking at it and you're going like, okay, if you're the Raptors, how do we match up with these teams as they got bigger? And I would be very concerned of what I saw on the last 3 or 4 days if I'm a Raptors fan. So I'll leave it there, folks. Hey, check out all the stuff here. Check out below what I thought about the Pistons earlier on in the season. And then also, too, hey, man, you know where to find me as always. X, Facebook, Instagram, Blue Sky, and, of course, right here on YouTube. Like, comment, share, subscribe. Love the support. Keep it up, guys. And we'll talk next time. Keep it locked. Peace.